On BBC2 in 15 minutes, a little later than scheduled because of coverage of today's sport, John le Carré's classic story Tinker Tailor's Soldier Spy continues as George Smiley's search for the mole nears its conclusion. Here on One Now, the news with Martyn Lewis.
A Foreign Office minister arrives in Beirut to try to secure freedom for the British hostages. But Douglas Hogg warns against hopes of an early release, saying he won't negotiate with the kidnappers. As the Prime Minister talks of Europe with Chancellor Kohl, Conservatives are told to keep cool and economic recovery will revive their fortunes. Good evening. For the first time in 6 years, a government minister has arrived in Beirut hoping to push forward negotiations for the release of the remaining British and American hostages, including Terry Waite, John McCarthy and Jackie Mann. But Douglas Hogg stressed that he would make no deals with kidnappers and didn't want to arouse false expectations. A senior member for the fundamentalist Hezbollah party has said that Iran would like the hostage issue resolved, but no one would put pressure on the kidnappers until 400 Lebanese and Palestinians were freed from Israeli jails.
One topic will dominate Mr. Hogg's visit, the hostages. Unfortunately, they're not a major issue for the fledgling Lebanese government, nor is their fate in the government's hands. But Mr. Hogg made it plain during his chaotic arrival news conference that he will devote most of his time to the hostage issue.
I can talk to people, I can talk obviously to the Lebanese government, and I shall be doing that. I have a very flexible program, and therefore if it seems helpful and desirable to talk to anybody else, I will do that as well.
One man he will not meet is Sheikh Abbas Massawi, the new hardline leader of Hezbollah, the group behind the hostage-taking. He was asked on the eve of the visit if it would help the hostages. His response was not encouraging. We do not expect anything but evil from the British, who mirror the policy of the United States, he said. Nonetheless, there is a slightly more optimistic mood around, a feeling that it's now in everybody's interest, the Lebanese, the Syrians, and most important of all, the Iranians, who hold the key to the hostages' future, to bring this affair to an end. Certainly Mrs. Jean Sutherland, who keeps a vigil in Beirut for her Scots-born husband Tom, kidnapped 6 years ago today, is optimistic.
Somehow the sense is that it is a new time. And I think this is why we have a sense maybe of increased expectancy, that it is time, the timing is right.
Mr. Hogg has asked to meet Hezbollah's spiritual leader, Sheikh Mohammed Hussein Fadlallah, a man whose influence over the kidnappers is beyond doubt. For the British government to allow a minister to venture into the southern suburbs of Beirut, heartland of the radical Shia Muslims, and to ask to meet a man whose rhetoric has stoked the anti-Western feeling here is an indication of the urgency the government attaches to freeing the hostages. But so far, the request to meet Sheikh Fadlallah has met with no response. Keith Graves, BBC News, Beirut.
The Conservative Party chairman, Chris Patten, has said there'll be no fudge or bust-up in the party about a single European currency. He told Tory MPs not to throw away the election by giving the impression of disunity. The Prime Minister has held 5 hours of talks at Chequers with the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl. The meeting, in advance of the European summit in Luxembourg later this month, was described as very friendly and substantive.
John Major was anxious to secure the German Chancellor's continued support to minimise the risk of Britain being bounced in Luxembourg into moves towards a single European currency, which could split the Conservatives, already trailing badly behind Labour in the polls. The two leaders agreed the summit should just take stock of progress. But despite their friendship, Mr. Kohl is pushing the Prime Minister for a firm commitment to monetary union, which he's anxious to avoid. But Tory ministers insist a compromise is possible.
There isn't going to be a fudge and there isn't going to be a bust-up. And there certainly isn't going to be the imposition of a single currency on the United Kingdom this year or next year.
And the chairman warned jittery Tory MPs not to throw away the next election by appearing disunited.
I've got no doubt at all that keeping cool, we'll see the economic recovery in the second half of the year, and that will make a considerable difference to our political prospects.
They're waiting, you see. They're not in control. They can't control the economic policy. They have no economic policy except waiting vainly in hope for something to turn up. That's not a government, that's a vacuum.
Neil Kinnock has challenged the Prime Minister to ignore cabinet faint-hearts and call the election, instead of wasting the country's chances and wasting its time. But with Mr Major's options narrowing and the election probably delayed till next spring, the Prime Minister will need all the allies he can find when the key decisions on European Union are taken at the end of the year.
One of Britain's biggest unions is believed to be on the verge of collapse. 15 officials from the construction industry's union, UCAT, are reported to be joining the electricians' union, the EETPU, which is no longer a member of the Trades Union Congress. UCAT officials had discussed joining a union within the TUC, but talks broke down after the General and Municipal Boilermakers Union was accused of trying to poach another union's members. UCAT said tonight that only 2 of the officials had formally resigned.
The union UCAT, which represents around 200,000 building workers, has been in crisis since its General Secretary, Albert Williams, was suspended last month by a newly elected left-wing executive. A group of around 15 union officials threatened to quit UCAT and take around a quarter of its members with them, following allegations of ballot rigging and a left-right power struggle. The officials had been discussing joining forces with Britain's second biggest union, the GMB. But today, its General Secretary confirmed that it had pulled out of the talks.
It now appears that all of the 15 have moved across to the EETPU, which is very sad, and I'm afraid it is part of what may be a breakup of trade union organisations in part of the building industry.
The reported defection of UCAT officials to a non-TUC union represents a blow to the Trades Union Congress. The GMB says it wanted to recruit the rebels to keep them within the TUC fold. But UCAT, with the backing of other unions, complained that the GMB was trying to poach its members, something which is outlawed by the TUC's long-standing Bridlington Agreement.
All we were trying to do was to recruit the disaffected officials to stop them sliding off into the EETPU, an expelled union, and we thought we could probably keep them within the trade union TUC family, and we nearly managed it.
The decision by the GMB not to recruit disaffected members of the construction union has avoided a damaging row which threatened to split the Trades Union Congress. But with thousands of construction workers likely to follow their rebel leaders out of the TUC, officials here at Congress House will come under pressure to revise the rules designed to prevent poaching amongst unions.
The funeral of John Martyn, the television sound recordist who was killed during an assignment in Ethiopia last week, has taken place at his hometown in Kenya. Mr Martyn died when an ammunition dump blew up on the outskirts of Addis Ababa after the rebel takeover in Ethiopia. He'd been working alongside the BBC with his colleague, the cameraman Mohammed Amin, who was also injured. John Martyn's coffin was carried in a long funeral procession to his family church near Mount Kenya. Representatives from Viz News, the television company which had employed Mr Martyn, attended the ceremony. His widow Maria and his 4 daughters were among over 1,000 mourners who gathered at the church to pay their respects. One of the world's greatest pianists, Claudio Arrau, has died in hospital in Austria. He was 88. Born in Chile, he could read music before he could read books. He lived most of his life abroad, establishing an international reputation as one of the foremost interpreters of Beethoven's music. There have been protests in the Soviet city of Leningrad as a campaign to remove one of communism's greatest monuments comes to a head. There's a referendum on Wednesday on whether to abandon the city's name in favour of a return to the original St. Petersburg, erasing nearly 70 years of history.
Our great city will come back to life under the name of Peter the Great. Campaigners who want Leningrad restored to the original St. Petersburg gathered in the main square in determined mood, despite torrential rain.
The city is best, the city of the world, and I think there's no other name except St. Petersburg.
Lenin is one of the great bandits of the 20th century.
St. Petersburg was the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution, and in 1924 it was renamed in honor of Lenin, revolutionary leader and founder of Soviet communist ideology. The Nazi siege of Leningrad during the Second World War killed hundreds of thousands of its citizens. Today, some feel a change of name would be a betrayal of the struggle to defend Leningrad. How can we change the name when all around are the graves of those who gave their lives for Leningrad, was one reaction. The people will give their views in a referendum on Wednesday. Carol Walker, BBC News, Leningrad.
Athletes from the British colony of Gibraltar have launched a campaign to be allowed to compete in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. They claim the Spanish government won't let them attend because of a long-running dispute over sovereignty. Today, the International Olympic Committee met in Birmingham to settle the final details of next year's Games.
As the IOC began its meeting in Birmingham, delegates from Gibraltar arrived to protest at what they described as a concerted campaign by Spain to block the colony from joining the Olympic movement. As evidence, they brought copies of a leaked directive from the Spanish Foreign Ministry. That states we are not able to accept the participation of Gibraltar, as this would mean granting them similar status to an independent state.
Well, I think it is a clear breach of the Olympic Charter rules, which call upon national Olympic committees to resist any attempt from any body or any government on any attempt to interfere on political grounds.
At the last Olympics in Seoul, some British colonies like Hong Kong were allowed to compete. Gibraltar claims it has an equally strong case, but the issue is complicated by centuries of dispute between Britain and Spain over sovereignty of the rock.
If they let Gibraltar participate as an independent nation, it will be as recognizing that they are not Spanish. So I think if they can participate as an independent country, then it will create many problems and many tensions in the Spanish people.
As Barcelona prepares for next year's Games, the row is bound to be a major embarrassment for the host nation. But the IOC has told the Gibraltar delegation this evening it's most unlikely they'll be allowed to compete in Spain.
Now cricket. England's captain Graham Gooch has given his side a genuine chance of beating the West Indies in the first test at Headingley. Playing one of the finest innings of his career, he made an unbeaten 154 to give England a lead of 277. By the close, the West Indies had already lost an important wicket.
Graham Gooch, 82 not out overnight and determined to make his century, not so much for personal reward, but for the winning position that would follow. It came with the last of 12 fours as he followed Barrington, Boycott and Botham to become only the fourth player to score a century on all English Test match grounds. But Pringle too played his part in addressing another, more relevant statistic: England's inability to beat the West Indies in a home Test match since 1969. And as Gooch opened up after lunch, this fascinating match swung England's way as never before. A lead of almost 250 was established, enough to cause substantial concern to the West Indian captain, until the new ball and a shorter run from Marshall disposed of Pringle for 27. The partnership had been worth 98, and England, during the hour and 3/4 lost to the rain, had reason to anticipate a lead of 300 plus. It didn't happen. Devon Malcolm the last to go as the innings folded after the resumption. His captain, batting throughout, had made an undefeated 154, his highest score against the West Indies. And finally, England's substantial bonus, as Simmons rashly hit out at his very first ball. As always, the game's balance remains.
The match could still go either way, but we've got something to bowl at, and if we bowl well, who knows what will happen. But it should be a good game.
Richie Richardson practiced late into the evening. The world champions aren't taking lightly the very real prospect of defeat.
The London Monarchs have won American football's World Bowl by beating the Barcelona Dragons at Wembley Stadium. The Monarchs, watched by a crowd of 61,000, won by 21 points to 0, with all their scores coming in the first half. The American Jim Courier has won the French Open Tennis Championships, beating Andre Agassi in a 5-set final in Paris. Agassi, in the final for the second year running, dominated the first set, which he won by 6 games to 3. Courier, playing in his first major final, gained in confidence after 2 breaks for rain. And despite losing the third set, he took the final into a 5th and deciding set with some typically powerful tennis. Appropriately, he clinched the match with his 7th ace to take the first Grand Slam title of his career. That's the BBC News Tonight. Good night.